Hey, you've summoned a lesser maker. Today, kind of going back to basics as far as building houses. We're going to be building a house at the basic shape of actually a shirt that I'm selling, but that's really not the point of this video. Reason we're going to this shape of building is because it's two basic shapes, a trapezoid and a triangle, and you cut out two of them, and there's basically no wrong way to cut out these two shapes. They always go together pretty well, and actually the more wonky these shapes go and the more inconsistent, the more character the building ends up having. You can see right here I'm cutting out a square, and it was too square, so I cut it out at an even more aggressive angle. And even these two shapes, they're not even straight. And as I'm cutting out the roof here, I'm adding a bit of a curve to kind of exaggerate the shapes and the kind of ricketiness of this whole building. You can see I'm not measuring, I'm not using a template. I'm just laying down what I made, and I'm just using the model itself to make the template. I glue those pieces of chipboard onto the foam core. So I'm using dollar store foam core, and now we're going to go into the detailing. I'm cutting it into strips. This is going to be our wood timbers. I have a Army Painter sculpting tool, and this has a couple ridges in it, and I'm just gliding it across the foam on all four sides. If you don't have this sculpting tool, what you can do is wrap wire around a pencil, and what this tool will do is it's going to leave evenly spaced marks into the foam core, and with the pointed end, whenever that texture jumps, I always carve in a knot with the pointed end and sculpt wood grain around that knot. Foam core is good for the details, but when you have a rigid surface, like something a model is going to be walking on, you're going to want to have something more structurally sound. For me, it's always easier to make a ruined building by building the whole thing and then cutting it apart later. So we're going to detail this whole thing and just pretend like it's brand new. We're going to go in with those foam core strips, and basically I'm going for a Tudor house. The easiest way to kind of improvise these layouts is just to look at a ton of reference photos. So for me specifically, I sketch these things really often. When I was first starting, what I would do is I'd print out, like have my phone beside me. I'd put windows where it would put windows. Notice how they're putting details around the doorways. This build is really simple, and that's why I recommend it for beginners, because there's not that all that much space. You can really improvise this one from scratch. So right here, for example, I'm going to do both sides a little differently. I'm doing some wood paneling on one side. I also detailed a window out. And then on this side, I'm going to be doing something a little more special, but you can see right here I'm going to be carving what I did out of that wood, out of that foam core, and after everything's painted, it's really hard to tell the difference. So you don't feel like you need certain materials. To add a bit more 3D effect, I'm adding an extra beam on top, and then you can see I'm carving in some knot holes, and then I'm dividing the two floors like I did on the other side. just to show that, to kind of unify it. And then I'm adding those straight beams across. I've seen on a lot of other YouTube channels where they use the pink foam to make bricks. And I've always wanted to try that with cobblestones and dollar store foam. I've always assumed it wouldn't work. So I have 2 rocks and a cup, and it's not an exact science, but I just tumbled it all together in a cup for about 30 seconds, and they came out to be perfect cobblestones. I know it's kind of a common phrase, when you assume something, you make a fool of yourself, but it's always good to kind of go back to basics, to experiment with different materials, because I feel like the foam that I use normally, without the paper backing, this wouldn't have worked on. So these cobblestones look really great, as you can see here, and I do recommend it. It's always kind of comforting to see that a cheaper material works the same as maybe a more expensive material. The nice thing about having a material that mimics another material that you actually build, like lumber or stones in this case, is you really feel like you're building a house, and it's really rewarding. So whenever you get a stone that fits perfectly in that spot, like it was made for it, it just is really satisfying. So I went ahead and went on the other side, and just kind of to unify it, I put cobblestones on both sides. I'm adding a faux crossbeam, and then we're gonna make shingles. Last time I bought shingles, I bought a scalloped pattern scissors. I think this is meant for fabric. That's what it's marketed for, but it makes a whole row of shingles automatically, and then you just go in, cut out each shingle individually. This is the fastest way I've come across making shingles. I've done it a lot of different ways. I've cut them all out by hand into squares. I've found there's a thing at work that cuts out little tiny squares, lay each shingle individually, but that's just a nightmare. My grandmother gave me a Cricut, and I made a file where the Cricut could cut it out automatically for me on paper, and even still, this is just so much faster. There's no setup, and even the top edge is basically, because the scallop is being cut out on both sides, it's basically being finished for you. So if that side is exposed, it still looks pretty good. As you can see, I'm kind of chaotic with what type of glue I use. It mostly just depends on how fast I work. So the tacky glue is for when I'm being really patient. When I want something done real fast, I use the hot glue gun, and it just goes so much faster. So either glue works, really. It's just a matter of just personal preference. And as you can see, my personal preference changes quite a bit. Okay, so now we're gonna destroy the building. Like I said previously, just so you know how a building kind of falls apart, I always like to build the building in its full form and then tear it apart. Because of that, as a beginner, I wasn't making the holes in the building big enough for hands. Something I try to keep in mind when I'm tearing a building apart is each floor, I like to keep the structure to make it look like it's still, like it would still be together. So like the top beam, I want that to be a structural unit. And then the second floor I want to be a structural unit, and then the mid floor I want to be a structural unit. So I kind of round the corners so that it looks like that is plausible to be standing. So I'm putting in, I put in those beams, and we're going to be separating this into floors, laying down shingles. I always like to put some spots where the shingles could have been pulled away from the area, like some timbers where those shingles would have been nailed to. That just kind of suggests that there's a structure underneath. Also suggests that and could still be standing. Other things I keep in mind, I'm gonna finish these shingles off, and I always, whenever a shingle like strip ends, I always leave a spot for a shingle in between the two shingle like strips, just so it adds a bit of variety randomly, and it adds a pattern that I wouldn't have normally come up with myself. Just like the wood knots that I put in the foam core. That stuff just happens by itself, and those are just happy accidents. So reward myself for getting out of the strip by leaving that little shingle space. After you lay all your shingles, especially with hot glue, I always go in with a popsicle stick and lift up individual shingles to kind of add a different variety of textures. And I burn off all the hot glue strands because it's gonna just look like a mess. There are ways to cover it up if you forget, but it's mostly with like Mod Podge spackle texture paste. So we're gluing in the second floor with just popsicle sticks, and I off camera finished off the other side of shingles. So I mixed up a spackle, Mod Podge, and paint mix, just basically a random mixture, and I used that to fill in the gaps in between the cobblestones, as well as kind of add a texture to the wood and the floor layer. I used a dark brown spray paint, and I'm dry brushing everything that's going to stay kind of a wood texture with a bright gold. And I'm going to dull this down because it was a little too much, but I'd rather it be too bright and dull it down than be too dark and wish it was brighter. I'm using that undercoat to use as kind of a watery green highlight. I mixed these are just dollar store paints, they're not model paints. So it's just kind of a random green. And all my buildings are green, so this is just kind of the unifying factor. So I put all this stuff down, and it kind of looks like it goes together because of the roof color I choose. I just go in now and I paint in all the stucco texture. When I build this stuff, I typically leave a kind of an air gap in between the stucco and the wood. I leave the hot glue in the center, and that way I can kind of smush my paintbrush flat and get it underneath the wood beams, and I don't have to mask it that way. I don't make any mistakes, and that's just a really fast way of doing that. I also base coated the rocks in the same cream color as well. So I watered down a kind of a dark reddish brown, and I put it all over everything that was supposed to stay brown, and that wash really did a whole lot to kind of make it a rich wood texture. And I just kind of applied that everywhere I wanted it to. Then I went in with a gray color, and then after that I mixed in a kind of greenish mossy color and put it in with the stones as well, just because I figured that's what it would be. To kind of finish everything off, I used my dip wash to kind of bring some life back into the woods as well as the stones, and this is how it turned out. As we're looking at the final shots, I'd just like to take a quick sec to thank my Patreon members, Leroy, Moonbad, Feder, Caracal, and Old School FRB. Thank you guys so much. If you're not aware, I have free STLs and free templates on Patreon. It doesn't require a Patreon subscription to download them. And there's a whole backlog of templates from weeks previous. I've almost been doing this for about a year. There's a lot of them. They've been accumulating over time. So if you do like those STLs and templates, it's only $2 a month to keep those coming. And that really goes a long way to supporting the channel. So thank you very much. Hey guys, just a quick announcement about the Patreon. I've been umming and ahhing about like the new Patreon perk, and I've decided that we're going to do battle reports. We're going to be doing battle reports a little like differently and kind of unique to us. My wife and I are going to be playing the game, and she's a really fantastic author, and so we were discussing what we should do to make it special, and what we landed on is we're going to be doing kind of a novelization. We're going to dramatize the battle report into short stories. So each battle report will have its own quote unquote chapter, and we're going to follow the story of a war band as it fights different and encounters different things in Mordheim. So that way you guys will see a lot of different factions, and it should kind of make it a little more unique. I didn't know what a battle report was before I started this channel, so when I was doing the research, it was going to be kind of painful and not all that entertaining for me to kind of bring life to a battle report. So this is kind of what we settled on, and I hope this is something you're excited for. If you're not a reader, we plan on making audio book versions of this, so you can participate in that way as well. Patreon is only $2 a month, and everything on Patreon is free for STLs and stuff like that. So just a quick announcement. I hope you guys are excited about this as I am about it. It should be ready sometime next week, I think, at least the written version. So there will be a preview for that for the first, and then every release after that will be a Patreon exclusive. So yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys have a good one.